Hi, folks. This is ICUJP for Friday morning, September 13th. Thank you all for being here. And I'm Rick. I'm one of I'm the communications and social media person for the group. And we are very, very glad that you can all join us today. So thank you very much for all being here. I'm going to put in the chat, there's a link tree that we have for ICJP that has a lot of information on all the wonderful stuff that we've been doing. Also on artists and writers and um, activists that have written books or have documentaries out. There's a link to a work by Greg Palast, one by Sonali Kolhatkar. So you can help support the people that have been speaking to us as well. And also that link tree has information on how you can donate. We are in a transition phase right now because for about 2.5 to 3 years, like everybody else on the planet, um, we've basically been doing everything all pretty much by Zoom, including some of the programs and events that we've done. And over the last year, so we've had about 3 or 4 events in the wild. And it's been really good. We just had one at Holman United Methodist Church last Sunday that I'll be talking about as well. And if you can find it in your heart to donate, there's a couple links in there. You can actually even do it on a monthly basis, which works out really well. It helps us with things like, and you don't think about this until you get back into doing live programs. You have to print stuff. You have to, there's things you have to deal with the places that you go to. Costs involved in that, and any of that is really helpful, and it helps us with our mission, and it's a pretty strong one. When you say religious communities should not be blessing, religious communities must stop blessing war and violence. It's a strong statement, and it can be divisive, but it's powerful. And when you do that, um, there's a lot of responsibility that goes behind it. So, uh, if you can help us in any way possible to do that, that would be great. Speaking of events, we just had one Sunday at Holman United Methodist Church, where we had a very, very large contingent of folks from ICUJP um, come. We had some people talk about and remember some of the people that joined the ancestors that were founders 23 years ago of ICUJP. Reverend George Regas, um, Reverend Jim Lawson, uh, Maher Hatut, and Rabbi Leonard Bierman. And one of the reasons that this organization has been around that long is when you have a contingent like that of people of different faiths all coming together and making a statement after September 11th that religious communities should not be blessing war and violence. Um, People pay attention, and people, you know, want to hear what you have to say. And we're very glad that people have been wanting to do that for over 23 years. So thank you all very much for coming. We had some great folks. We had some masterful hosts do the event. Um, Aisha Mason was really great in the section we had, and Lewis Chase. I told him that, the way that he was handling things, that we were changing back and forth, it was like watching the old Ed Sullivan show and the guy spinning plates. And he was awesome at it. So we for those of you who are new to joining us, we normally have somebody do a reflection, something that's on their mind or something that they want to talk about. This week, we have a reflection from Dr. Ruby Omar. So, Ruby, the floor is yours.
And I'm in three different places because when they asked me to do a Friday the 13th, I thought about, oh, what could I do? And I found three people. One was Ernest Holmes, When Thoughts Are Things. And then Muriel Shabazz did the mission statement to the Oath of Manifestation by Cheryl Ward. So, Dave Clinton, I'm going to ask you when I do the Oath of Manifestation if you would echo. And everyone else can echo along with him. And whether you're in bed or with your people, or if you want to do something different or whatever it is, you can just say what he said after I say the verse. But in Thoughts Are Things, and I'm talking about Ernest Holmes. He one of these said, thoughts of worry, fear, anger, jealousy, and other emotional conditions are basically mental in their nature, and such are this physical suffering to which the flesh is heir. And so we can change those things by changing our consciousness and making a decision to go forward, to know that one great law is the law of life. And when we think about that law of life, that's each one of us in our own way, our own law of life. And so this Oath of Manifestation, which was written by Cheryl Ward, and the mission of this oath is, it just went off my other screen, which I'm going to get it back on here. But anyway, the mission which is here, is able to support each one of us in our own thoughts of what it is that we're going to do. And this gives us our daily thoughts. And so, Dave, would you please come forward now and just mute yourself?
I'm here, Doc Ruby, and
Okay.
just tell me when to start.
Okay. So this Oath of Manifestation was given to us by Reverend Cheryl Ward and was honored by several people. And if any of you want to look at it afterwards, you can reach it on YouTube, or you can go forward on and get it on the, and I think I'm going to do it a different way because this way I can stay on the screen. I'm staying in the book, and I'm going to be on my computer too, and you all can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we're getting ready to start. Now, when we think about 1933, and Ernest Holmes had said, thoughts are things. And then we think about this oath, which was written by Reverend Cheryl Ward in the 90s somewhere. I mean, it's different space. So we're going to begin now. I accept, expect, and receive unexpected good.
I expect, accept, and receive unexpected goods.
And you all can say it because you're muted. And you can say it along with this loving spirit, Dave. So I'm going to start just a little bit over again. I accept, expect, and receive unexpected good.
I accept, expect, and receive unexpected goods.
Unexpected money, unexpected love, unexpected kindness.
Unexpected love, unexpected money, unexpected kindness.
Unexpected generosity.
Unexpected generosity. Sorry.
Yes, that's okay. Unexpected generosity, unexpected offers, unexpected prosperity,
Unexpected generosity, unexpected offers, and unexpected charity.
unexpected prosperity coming in unexpected ways,
Unexpected prosperity coming in unexpected ways.
from unexpected places
From unexpected places.
in my life and the life of others.
In my life and the life of everyone.
I am constantly guided and boldly empowered
I am constantly guided and boldly empowered
to receive the lavish abundance of the universe.
to receive the lavish abundance of the universe.
I accept the principle
I accept the principle
that abundance and prosperity have already been given to me.
that abundance and prosperity have already been given to me.
My acceptance makes it real
My acceptance makes it real
and opens the space for manifestation to rush in.
and opens a space for manifestation to rush in.
I open wide the doors of my consciousness
I open wide the doors of my consciousness
to receive and to give.
to receive and to give.
It is done now.
It is done now.
Through this oath of manifestation, all things are possible.
Through this manifestation, all things are possible.
I declare absolutely that I live in a friendly universe
I declare absolutely that I live in a friendly universe
that is always providing for me.
that is always providing for me.
I feel it powerfully happening now.
I feel it powerfully happening now.
I am open to receive more abundance and to give more abundance than I have ever experienced before.
I am ready to give more abundance and feel more abundance than I ever have before.
I can afford anything I desire.
I can afford anything that I desire.
In fact, I am so prosperous, I need never worry again.
In fact, I am so prosperous that I need never worry again.
I am grateful for all that I already have.
I am grateful for all that I already have
And grateful for all that I'm ready to give.
and grateful for all that I am ready to give.
I keep myself lifted in high consciousness no matter what the appearances are.
I keep myself lifted in higher consciousness no matter what may appear.
God is all there is.
God is all there is.
I let the God times roll.
And let the God times roll.
And so it is. Ashe, amen, hallelujah.
And so it is. I say amen and hallelujah.
All right. Thank you, Dave. Thank you for being there this morning. And thank
you
all
for
of
those
you.
words.
Thank
I
you
just
very
thought
much.
I thought this would be great for Friday the 13th because we know, hey, we're already worked for good and worthy of good.
Yep.
And that's it.
Ruby, thank you very much. That was really great. Okay. So, we have a person that's going to be presenting today that has been involved with ICUJP on and off for a while. I remember being in a event that I think KPFK put together at Emmanuel Presbyterian Church, and this was right after the I can't remember if it was the election of first or second of George Bush Jr. And it was a pretty down time for people. And there were a few folks that spoke and stuff. And the person that held that group together and helped make it a place where people uh, had positive thoughts that they probably didn't have coming in. The person that helped was our speaker today, Mimi Kennedy. And this is somebody that I have seen on and of course you all have seen on various programs. Most recently, I think on the show Mom, I think, which like all Chuck Lorre things is pretty crazy and wonderful uh, and really fun to watch. But she's had a varied life that she's going to talk about. The floor is yours, and I'll start the slides whenever you'd like.
Okay, Rick, thank you. Oh, it's so good to see my friends here and the people of ICUJP that I'm coming to know. So thank you for being here. Um, Steve Rohde asked me to do this and pull together my thoughts. And I read it for my husband yesterday for Larry, and he said, "Wow, you're making sense of your life," which is not always easy for us to do. When Steve Rohde asked me to present on how my activism has affected the choices I've made as an actress, I wanted to say what I always think when I get this question. Actors don't often get to choose. I didn't say that, but just yesterday morning, I heard my friend John Lithgow on NPR tell the interviewer, "You'd be surprised how little deciding there is in an actor's career. You wait for people to want you." So there it is. But when I saw the flyer for this talk with that picture of me with Medea Benjamin, it cleared my head. And I realized how much I wanted two things at once from the time I was a child, and that has moved my choices. I wanted to be an actress, and not only that, but a famous one, making a living doing what I loved and can do well, pretending to be other people. And I also desperately wanted to be a good person and help the world. I have that picture of Medea. Oh, well, it's all right. I won't share my screen. I had no idea about the marketplace of show business, and neither did anyone around me when I was growing up. My Catholic nun school teachers, my naive about show business parents, and I didn't know anything about activism. I graduated from high school without ever hearing about the Hollywood blacklist. How is that possible? I'd heard something about the House Un-American Activities Committee because my father had seen and loathed it close up in days he'd worked in Washington as a lawyer for his friend, then Congressman Kenneth Keating. Unions? Kodak kept them out of Rochester. Rochester was polite, no political conflict. The Black Communities Uprising in 64 shocked white Rochester. In 64, I'd barely known there was a large Black community in my city. I hadn't wondered where the woman who cleaned our house lived. Slowly, my eyes opened and my ignorance shamed me. Later, I saw how Jane Fonda was punished for her anti-war views during Vietnam. The Dixie Chicks in the 90s made clear that blacklisting was alive and well, and a verb was coined for it. You were Dixie Chicked. At the start of my career, I'm sure my coming from such a nice upstate city helped me with producers and sponsors. And I carried the name of a beloved dead president. For a long time, I didn't feel called upon to state a public political opinion. I didn't have the platform. I worked in private spheres politically. But in my late career, I did have a platform. And the trolls shut me up. Even some fans do, I'm afraid. They shut me up when I opposed the Iraq War or reposted Black Lives Matter. Shut up and act, they would write. Way to go to stir up the hate, Mimi. That one hurt as a nonviolent activist. There is a tightrope between activism and an acting career for celebrities and successful working actors, as my friend Dave Clennon knows. But I didn't know this when I was little and longed to be an actress. But I'm not sure it was a choice. You can show slide 2, Rick. It was simply my only longing for my future, doing what I was good at and getting paid for it. It got me attention from an early age. I was an excellent mimic. My karmic email moniker, Mimi K, mimic always makes me smile. And I could guess what people were thinking, how they would talk. I could imitate them. I concocted costumes that transformed me internally. I was a chameleon. I think the longing came from a soul place. It was a need, a hunger to be recognized in literally. When I came into this world, it was as if I'd lost my identity card somewhere between being a soul and being a body. I needed to re-know myself, recognize. And I employed a process of elimination. Am I like this? Am I like her? Am I like him? Like that? I thought in the end I would come down to recognizing a unique self, or maybe there was no such thing. Most actors say we learn from every part we play. It is true for me. But only highly awarded actors get to choose their parts. And then they're only that part for a time. If you're a working actor whose family depends on your paycheck, it is hard to turn things down, a part or an audition. I've done it only under dire circumstances. I didn't want to be in Oliver Stone, though he is a friend of many, in his Natural Born Killers, because the script was so violent and I feared it would inspire violence, although it was written to be a satire. It did inspire violence. I didn't want to be in a crude sitcom pilot that featured a breastfeeding mother doing a dozen wrong things for her baby. I was nursing at the time, and my baby's development was important to me, and so was giving nursing women the right information. My agent yelled at me. I also refused to play a part where I was slashed to death by my daughter-in-law. I had just acquired a daughter-in-law that I loved, and I didn't want that to be the first thing she saw me in on film. But let's start with things I was born with. I definitely did not choose them, unless I chose before I was born, which is possible. You can show the next slide, Rick. I embodied an afterlife stewardess monitoring the souls of the dead arriving and departing in the afterlife in the 1989 movie Chances Are. You can take that down, Rick. Okay, first I was born a Kennedy. Not one of those Kennedys, which only made it more complicated to explain, but I am aware that the name helped me as I began my career. I would be naive not to know so. Attention was paid. I was always careful to tell people the truth. I was born to Republican Kennedys in Rochester, New York, but that didn't matter in the early 70s. Any Kennedy was a good Kennedy. My father was a prominent lawyer in Rochester, and when I was growing up, I thought our extended family was the Kennedys. It hurt to discover that there were nationally important ones. And when JFK became the first Catholic since Al Smith to run for president, I was disturbed because my loyalties were riven between my family's two great religions, Catholicism and the GOP. So what would my father do? I asked him who he'd vote for. I'm 12 years old. He admitted that Nixon had not been his choice in the primaries. And he told me of a story of his time in Washington. He was working in 1952 for Rochester's native son, Kenneth Keating, on a House Judiciary Committee assignment. It had nothing to do with the House Un-American Activities, he quickly said, though it was 1952. That's how he saw it up close and loathed it. But one day, he picked up the phone to hear, "Hello, Jerry, this is Dick Nixon." Nixon was then a congressman, but he was about to be vice president on Ike's ticket. He gave my father a name for the investigation list, and my father asked, "What has this person done that needs investigating?" And Nixon said, "You know the drill, Jerry. They don't need to have done anything. They just want their name in the paper that they're being investigated." My father said, "We don't do that," and hung up. He always thought that maybe he was on Nixon's enemy list and always blamed Nixon and the Get Kennedy Club when he couldn't get a good parking space. But he refused to tell me who he'd vote for because he said the secrecy of the ballot was sacred. And even my mother and he didn't tell each other how they voted always. A circular for the Theocratic Party had just come to the House, and I brought it to him thinking I'd found a perfect solution for a Catholic conscience. "Daddy, the Theocratic candidate promises a Bible in every home. Doesn't that sound great?" To my 12-year-old Catholic fervor, it did. And my father said very firmly, "He can say that all he wants, Mimi, but there's a little thing called separation of church and state in this country, and he couldn't put a Bible in every home if he wanted to. That guy's a crackpot." Oh, okay. Also in 1952, my father met JFK in Washington. He went to the young congressman's office just to meet him out of curiosity. And JFK greeted him with, "Someone said there's a Republican lawyer named Kennedy in town, and I said I'd never believe there was such a thing as a Republican Kennedy." But my great-grandfather landed in New York in 1868. I think he had Irish Republican sympathies, Fenians, and he admired Lincoln for freeing the slaves. Then he got rich, making hydrants. The company still exists. His choice was affirmed when his son, my father's father, died young, and a Republican judge married my widowed grandmother. This rescued 4 young children, and my father revered the man, whose name was William Love, and therefore he went by the delightful oxymoron Judge Love. He was an elected judge, so every time he ran, my father walked our neighborhood to get out the vote for him, and I went with him. This was early civic activism. With a partisan tinge, I remember my father, to his credit, being somewhat abashed when he turned away from a door at which he'd only knocked once, gently. And he said, "We don't have to try too hard here. I think Frank's a Democrat." In JFK's office, the two pored over a map of Ireland and discovered ancestors who lived in adjacent counties. So maybe, but in Ireland, where families of 10 kids were not unusual, even in a famine, that was close enough. But to my child's eye, there was always a resemblance. But maybe all 50s white guys looked alike. The nuns said, and this is about the second thing I didn't choose, that our Catholic faith was a gift, and I was born into it. But to children who'd never chosen it, it didn't always seem like a gift. You could go to hell on your 7th birthday for eating a hot dog if it was Friday, and you died before going to confession. But the night before your birthday, age 6, you could have shot somebody on 5th Avenue and gotten away with it, like some grown-ups. I took this stuff very seriously. Here's a warning from the Baltimore Catechism that I had to memorize in 3rd grade. You can show that slide. Okay. John has 4 mortal sins. He goes to confession, tells 3, but he's ashamed of the other. He comes out with 5. And no matter how often John goes to confession after this, no sin will ever be forgiven until he tells the one he deliberately left out. As often as he goes to confession without telling this sin, all his confessions will be bad. And if he goes to communion, this will be a sacrilege too. It was not always clear to me as a child that being an actress and going to heaven were on a collision course, but anyone reading the signs could foresee it. There were the 2 parts of me, receiving my first communion and getting ready to do the can, I guess. My father taught me many political truths that have consoled me to this day. My best friend's father, and you can put up slide 8, Rick, was New York Secretary of State under Governor Rockefeller. And one day, my father said to me, there I am, me and my friend Nancy and her dad and Rocky and her mom, even though it looks like Happy Rockefeller, but it was Nancy's mom. One day, my father said to me, I know you'd like me to have my name in the papers like your friend Nancy's father. I was asked to run for city council a while ago, but I turned it down because sometimes, Mimi, you can have more influence when you keep your name out of the papers. Those words actually consoled me a few times. You can take that down, Rick. Thanks. When I was frustrated that progressive Democrats of America didn't get any attention in the media from the time we began organizing in 2004. The Democratic Party at the time would rather have seen a rat infestation at their DC headquarters than anti-war social justice progressives successfully infiltrating local party power structures. But that's what we did. When I went to college, I chose Smith College, and it was the first secular institution I'd attended since public school kindergarten. The nuns warned I would lose my faith. Damnation. I took the risk. I was ready. Early on, I answered a question about the Vietnam War. Did I support President Johnson's escalation? Yes, I wrote, because communists are godless. And if we didn't fight them over there, we'd end up fighting them over here. By November, I was arguing with my parents over the Thanksgiving turkey. I'd turned against the war because I'd read the New York Times every day for the first time in my life, instead of the Rochester papers that featured the body count like a box score on the front page. And we were expected to cheer when there were huge numbers of dead Viet Cong, more than our boys. I read Harrison Salisbury's reports in the Times about the corruption of the South Vietnamese generals. That summer, I made another choice to work as a counselor at an urban summer day camp run by civil rights pastor Canon Julian Simpkins. By 1970, I was graduating with an armband on my gown and a flower in my hand. Nixon had bombed Cambodia and the National Guard had killed students at Kent State. I'd been attending SDS meetings, and I helped organize Smith College's anti-war readings with the theater department during the nationwide college moratorium. But that summer, I graduated, went to New York. I began pounding the pavement, worked as a temporary secretary. The cover of the Village Voice one week summed up my feelings pretty well. It showed a cartoon woman holding her head in her hands and crying, "Nuclear war? Oh no, there goes my career." And now we come to another choice. Early on, you can bring that down, thanks. Early on, there was a cattle call audition. Hold on, I've left my speech behind somewhere. There was a cattle call audition for an Andy Warhol play. Andy Warhol, the man who'd practically invented 1960s fame. I went. My group was the last to get into the theater. I never got to read. They ran out of time. But as we actors rose, disappointed to leave, Andy's finger waved from the stage towards me, and the director ran up the stairs to my seat and said, "Here's a script. Come to rehearsal Monday. Andy likes your face. He wants you in the play." Oh my God. I started reading the script on the subway home. It was 3 inches thick and incomprehensible. And I learned on Monday that it was transcribed word for word from Andy and his friends' conversations while they were tripping on LSD. During the rehearsal of the first incomprehensible scene, the director looked around, found me leaning against the wall, and said, "You don't have a role yet, do you? Go stand to the side of the stage and pose like a B science fiction movie queen." I did. I struck a pose, and he laughed and said, "Perfect. And you'll be nude. You don't mind nudity, do you? You'll be wearing red high heels and carrying a glass plate of steaming human shit." I sent back the script that night, and I never saw any of them again. I'm guiltily happy to say that the play opened in London and bombed. There was also a choice around Saturday Night Live, network executives and my own. It was 5 years later, I'd already made my Broadway debut in Grease, the 50s musical. I auditioned for Saturday Night Live so successfully that at the last minute, Lorne Michaels wanted me to join Gilda Radner and Lorraine Newman as not ready for primetime player. But I had to be approved by the network execs. And at 1 in the morning, Lorne called to say apologetically that they decided on Jane Curtin. But he would use me. He promised if I stayed in town, I'd be in the satiric commercials they filmed and other bits they'd be doing. I was in the middle of a college tour of the National Lampoon show, and Larry, who was then not quite my husband, was in the cast. And Lawrence said, but listen, you're already in that relationship with that guy, and you're under contract. Maybe that's what's supposed to happen. I went back on the tour. And otherwise, I wouldn't be married. I wouldn't have my children. I wouldn't be here. But I saw the fame train for my generation leave, and I wasn't on it. Recognition. Who am I? What do I really want? And what does the universe want of me? Fame came at last, 1981. You can put up this slide, Rick. I was on the cover of TV Guide for a sitcom, The Two of Us, with British genius Peter Cook. It was canceled due to Peter's alcoholism. By then, I was pregnant after years of trying. I took a semester of Spanish during my long hiatus, not acting. I took it at Santa Monica Community College. Why? In order to converse with the Salvadorian women who were hiring then as domestics and nannies. And I heard Blaise Bonpane on the radio. And I read a book by a Jesuit friend about the martyrdom of Rutilio Grande, a Jesuit in El Salvador. Then, of course, we heard about Bishop Romero being murdered saying Mass. I wrote protest letters to Reagan and volunteered for Office of the Americas and the Committee in Solidarity for the People of El Salvador. Larry invited Blaise to speak at Oakwood School, where he taught English, where Larry had taught English for 38 years. I invited Teresa Bonpane for lunch because I'd heard she was an ex-nun and I was writing a sitcom spec script, Dreams of Fame as a Writer of TV, about three sisters who returned to their hometown to live, and one of them's an ex-nun. The idea and title were stolen, actually, that's another story. And there was no ex-nun in the show that resulted, but it's no longer worth bitching about because the friendship with Teresa and Blaise blossomed as one of the greatest gifts of my life. Did I choose this? Yes, I did. It was wonderful, a result of a string of choices I had made without knowing exactly where they'd lead. But I wanted to grow closer to people of integrity, action, and compassion, like the people who are listening right now. Teresa and Blaise asked me to MC their annual awards dinners, where I came to meet people like David Clennon, Chris Christopherson, Amy Goodman, Dolores Huerta, Bishop Samuel Ruiz, Diane Ortega, Daniel Ellsberg, so many others who resonated with my heart and soul and mind far more than my fellow actors. Though I love actors because we are generous and willing and fun. But now I was with people who were serious, and I wanted to be serious about ending what Blaise Bonpane called the war system. When I got the role of hippie mother Abby in Dharma and Greg, it was 1997. Dharma and Greg was half owned by Fox and half owned by Disney, and Fox was owned by Rupert Murdoch. One day I arrived at work to see Chuck Lorre, the show's creator, staring up at the top of the soundstage. I followed his line of vision, expecting to see men working perilously on the roof or something in the sky. Instead, I saw the huge mural of Darth Vader fighting Luke Skywalker with light swords that decorated the front of our soundstage. And I said, "What are you looking at?" And he said, "That. I hope it's not an omen." It kind of was. 9/11 happened in the fourth year of that show. We were on hiatus for a week. When we returned, cast and crew were called together and told that security measures were going in place because the FBI had received a credible threat against the studio. I looked around and wondered who I'd stop to save if they fell and the fireball was roaring through the elephant doors. Would I be brave like the people who'd stopped to help coworkers down the smoky Twin Tower stairs? Or would I run to save my own ass? My honest secret answer was I would run to save my own ass, and it horrified me. I didn't want to die, but I especially didn't want to die because I was a sitcom actress on a lot owned by Rupert Murdoch. So on New Year's Eve in 1999, as a hit sitcom cast member, I might have been able to wangle an invitation to some cool parties, but I made a life-changing choice. And I went with Larry to stand with the Nevada desert experience at the nuclear testing site. Franciscans Rosemary Lynch and Louis Vitale, Pace Bene, had been conducting prayer vigils there for years. Daniel Berrigan came to that vigil. Elders from the Shoshone tribe conducted a midnight ceremony. Martin Sheen arrived. And true to form, I admit, I felt a little jealous about the fuss that he created. He was famous, I was chopped liver. But I made myself remember why I was there, because my childhood nightmares had me and my world pulverized by the flash of an atomic bomb. I was there because I recognized myself. I needed to be there. Rosemary Lynch demonstrated nonviolent physical resistance in case of arrest and told of having converted the general who ran the facility with her decade of prayerful vigils at the gates. One day he called her into his office and said he'd asked for reassignment because he could no longer live with himself as the overseer of nuclear weapons advancement. A still small voice inside me during that demonstration said, "You have to study nonviolence." And that led to James Lawson. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. Activist Aisha Mason, who's been mentioned and known to, of course, ICUJP, had convinced Jim to teach his nonviolence course for free to all who showed up one Saturday a month at his church, Holman Methodist, in the West Adams district. I had first seen Reverend Lawson as an honoree at the Bonpayne's annual awards dinner, and sometimes the event had been held at his Holman Methodist Church. The 2000 selection of George Bush and Dick Cheney troubled me because I saw hearings on C-SPAN about ballots not being picked up from polling places in Black churches and roadblocks being put up near Black polling places on election day. The hanging chads stopped the recount that would have proved Gore won, and then we went to war in Iraq, as had been planned all along. I marched to forestall it, spoke on behalf of Teresa Bonpayne's Coalition for World Peace. I joined Artists United to Win Without War and attended a press conference led by Mike Farrell and Robert Greenwald and the retired anti-war Admiral Eugene Carroll. I got to speak near the end, and a reporter asked me, "Hey, Mimi, is there ever any war you'd oppose? What about Hitler?" It's always about Hitler, but I said, the question isn't whether I'd oppose any war, it's whether going to war now is wise. The din of departing press drowned me out, and the next day the LA Times featured a cruel political cartoon that depicted Mike Farrell saying at the podium, "I'm Mike Farrell and I know about war because I acted in one." And behind him was a banner with the other speakers listed, and I was at the end. It said, "Mimi, who?" It hurt. The backlash had begun, but I got too busy to care. Dennis Kucinich met me at an event. He liked what I said about nonviolence and asked me to travel with his anti-war primary campaign. Kerry won the nomination, saying nothing against the war, and Tim Carpenter, a Kucinich staffer whose formation as an activist with the Catholic Worker in Orange County had made him a real spiritual brother. asked me to chair the advisory board of a new group he was founding, Progressive Democrats of America. You can show the slide of Tim. Our first project was the kickoff at Roxbury Community College in Boston on one of the days of the '04 Democratic Nominating Convention. Tim gathered progressive delegates from all the other campaigns and appointed me to MC and wrangle all the political and showbiz celebrities who would show up demanding the microphone immediately and ignoring their time limit. I told him I could do that, but be a board chairperson? I hadn't been at a grown-up meeting since taking dictation for a temp boss when I was a temp secretary in 1972. He laughed and said I'd be fine. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. At that meeting, I was on a panel sitting next to Tom Hayden, and I fought back tears thinking about attending those SDS meetings at Smith as a timid newbie, and now sitting next to one of his founders as an equal, helping to organize Progressive Democrats of America. Around that time, I was interviewed by a young reporter for KPCC who asked if I thought there was a new blacklist. My answer was that I couldn't tell, since there was such a career slowdown for me as a woman over 40 juggling parenting and a career. I thought that had more impact on my career. But I think now I knew I was whistling past the graveyard. There was a blacklist, informal, not publicized. It was just uncomfortable for projects to attract attention with an actor who was too out front against the Bush administration and the war. It was based on lies, that war, but the troops went with sincerity. And when we were called upon at Dharma and Greg to make Christmas greetings for the troops, I always participated. But my few suggestions for including hopes for peace were always vetoed. But the pride and satisfaction I got from building PDA far outweighed anything I could have expected from show business. I was planning with Congress members, Barbara Lee, Maxine Waters, and John Conyers were on my advisory board, along with Code Pink activist Jody Evans and Medea Benjamin. I was learning from labor leaders across the country, Donna Smith, Michael Leidy, and most of all from Tim Carpenter. And then I landed two of the most significant film roles of my career. I had never really been in great movies, but now I was in the BBC feature film In the Loop, an anti-war classic comedy starring James Gandolfini and a bunch of brilliant British actors. James and I played two Americans secretly opposed to the war. Then, because Woody Allen had liked In the Loop, I got Midnight in Paris, one of his best and most beloved films. I'm glad Midnight in Paris was shot before Ronan Farrow's articles appeared in the New Yorker reviving the abuse allegations about his sister. They had been dismissed in court years ago, but now I had to believe them. And I don't think I'd have been able to say yes to this film if I'd read those articles before getting the offer. In this instance, I am glad my strength to say no was not tested. PDA was my work for 10 years, traveling, giving speeches, planning events, writing blogs, doing outreach. Judy Hess, who has also passed away, was my right hand. And we often mused that what we were doing must have been like the days of early Christianity, going from city to city, sleeping on couches and floors, wherever someone offered their house, eating meals there, or serving meals in our own homes to big groups, holding meetings in our dining rooms, attending events of our coalition partners, knocking on doors with endorsed candidates. I would keep saying to Tim, I have to get back to acting. And he would just laugh and say, Mimi, you and I are in this till the bitter end. And that came in April 2014, when Tim succumbed to the cancer he'd lived with since he was a teenager. At his memorial in Northampton, Massachusetts, a month later, Bernie Sanders spoke, and I presented him with PDA's 10,000 signatures, asking him to run as a Democrat, not an independent, in the presidential primaries. He said yes. And when he saw 450 PDA supporters at a union hall in LA for his first rally, he thought this could work. Soon he was speaking to 25,000 in arenas, and it changed history. I had to fundraise for PDA. You all know about this. Boy, I hated it because in my family growing up, it was the height of rudeness to even think about how much money anyone had. But fundraisers have to know. It was one of the many things I did that I never thought I could do and didn't want to do. But I did it because the team required it of me, and the money helped change the Democratic Party and end a war. Tim's founding dream was that PDA would one day field a progressive Democratic presidential candidate, and he got one, Bernie, within 10 years. The thing I'm proudest of is my work on elections. There's so many unsung heroes in the movement we called election protection, and then election integrity, and now election protection again after the right wing stole election integrity. There were computer geeks, county officials, state and federal legislators. It wasn't a popular issue. People called us conspiracy theorists. But we finally showed the need for restoring paper ballots after the Bush administration had digitized most of US voting machines with paperless machines via the lethal and stealthily GOP enabling Help America Vote Act 2002. When I spoke at a congressional hearing for the first time, led by John Conyers, I was educating Congress members about the danger, and Gerald Nadler told me as we left, "That was very informative, thank you. I knew touchscreens were trouble, but I didn't know you could fuck with a paper ballot, excuse my French." I said, "Yes, Jerry, you can indeed fuck with a paper ballot if you never count it by hand and only trust the computer. Without paper, there's nothing to check. Paper was the solution to our supposed red waves, and now most counties have them, paper ballots." Three things I remember most vividly and fondly. A huge anti-Iraq war march to the federal building, where those prepared to be arrested were staging a street blockage. It hadn't yet begun when I saw Steve Rohde standing with James Lawson, and I was so happy and honored to be part of an action with these legends that I approached them by skipping, not walking, skipping like a child. I will never forget the grin on Reverend Lawson's face. When the blockade began and the demonstrators were cuffed one by one and led away, Steve Rohde called out their names in his big, booming voice. And I remember feeling a little jealous. There it is, I thought, the recognition I longed for. That is fame. I remember, too, how I felt the ghosts of our Iraq war dead crowding in with the living in the halls where I spoke with Gold Star families, particularly Cindy Sheehan, whose grief took the form of organizing simply by standing on the road to George Bush's ranch with a sign that said, "What noble cause," after her son Casey died. I felt the dead on the Santa Monica beach too, as I helped the Veterans for Peace set up wooden crosses on weekends with names of dead soldiers from Iraq. Arlington West was the only memorial to US military Iraq war dead. The government hadn't bothered to do anything. More crosses were added every week until they finally ran out of space and the war finally ended. And there was a late night phone call. You can put up the next slide, Rick. From then California Secretary of State Deborah Bowen. She called me at 1 a.m, such a surprise, but she wanted moral support before she issued the Red Team review of California's electronic voting systems. She was going to kick out one of the ones that refused to return to paper ballots. She restored paper ballots to California. She knew the vendor would be furious, and it was. She said she was crossing all her T's and dotting all her I's so they couldn't get at her legally. But the vendor, ES&S, hounded her relentlessly, and the stress made her quit public office. It was a great loss. She was democracy's first responder when others weren't paying attention. It took amazing courage, and we owe her a great debt of gratitude. Without paper, stealing was easy, and it was happening. With paper, though the phony election integrity mob of Stop the Steal was too behind the times to grasp it, until recounts of paper in Georgia and Arizona proved Trump lost, stealing is harder because with paper you can check. I feel as if the years since 2000 have been a long march with the living and the dead. But it was finally the community I chose completely. I was pulled into it by my heart, my body, and my soul. It soothed my Catholic conscience. My friends in the movement knew how to use what I had to offer: talent, a name, some financial resources, a little fame, and use those resources to make life better for others. In return, I've received the real recognition, self-knowledge that I yearned for. So thank you.
That was pretty heavy. That's the
I
most
waste your
articulate.
time on anything that's not.
That's the most articulate thing I can say right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was great. Um, we wanted to open the floor up to questions, comments. If anybody has any, you can raise your hand on Zoom electronically. You can also do that the old-fashioned way that we used to do before we all became electronic beings. So Don, you had your hand up.
Thank you so much. That was really cool, actually. And my wife and I were just talking about your movie Midnight in Paris yesterday on our walk. I was like, wow, I'm gonna see her tomorrow. Um, being an Arab American, and I've gone to Middle East working with refugees from the victims of the Iraq War. Thank you so much for your work. It affects the people that I meet in Iraq, or not Iraq, but in Amman, because that's where they all ended up at. And it's just amazing to think of when I first, actually the second time I went there, the perspective I got from the effects of that war was shocking. I remember I was I had a driver that was from Iraq. He owned a family jewel business, jewelry. He was a jeweler, and so he just lost everything, and he couldn't work in Amman because they weren't recognized as a refugee. So he had to make money illegally, because if he had a job, he'd get booted out. So he was our driver, and he really showed me a lot about the effects of that war. And one of the things I noticed is everybody in the Middle East had these bumper stickers of Saddam Hussein on their car. And I'm like, what is that about? He goes, people loved him there because he kept peace. He kept the peace, and he said something. My driver said something to me that it's like kind of shocked me. He says, if the Saudis bombed the Twin Towers, why did you bomb us? And then I'm like, well, I didn't have an answer for that. He said, because all Arabs are the same to you. I said, no. And it's like, it's really shocking to see that. And, I'll be there again in November. And every time I go there, and work with refugees, it's a result of a war that we started. And it's hard as an American to go and talk to people that we bombed them and now we're coming to help them. It's just almost like crazy. But I really appreciate what work you do, and because I'm not an actor, and my face isn't out on TV or anything, but it really goes a long way to encourage work like when I go to the Middle East, to know that people like you are fighting against war. And it's shocking to see it breaks my heart when I'm working with kids who don't understand war. And, they just, every family I touched that one year that everybody was affected by that war. And they lost parents, kids, lost their siblings, they lost homes, and because of a war that we started and we keep doing. So to me, it's like a very encouraging what you guys do. And I really appreciate it. And I'll be thinking of you when I go back to the Middle East and into Amman and the refugee camps and, deal with that stuff. And if I can, I'll put a picture in the chat that I got from an artist who came out of a refugee camp that I bought off him. He sell it for $10, but I gave him a lot more money than that. And there's a picture of a kid holding a cup crying. And so war affects kids all over the world. And now it's like Gaza's like crazy. But anyway, thank you so much. It was really cool hearing you. And I'm going to shut up. Sorry for talking so much.
Thank you, Don. The best thing you could tell me is that it will be in your mind when you go there, because I wish I had several lifetimes and that I could actually go hands-on to. So to be carried in your mind is really a great gift. Thank you. Thank you for the work you do.
So, maybe I wanted to ask you, and other people are probably getting questions ready too. One thing that struck me about Progressive Democrats of America, and I think one of the biggest legacies that you guys have, is something that I kind of referenced um, in a reflection I had a few weeks ago, called and I titled it "The Next Best Time Is Now," and it comes from that. There's a Chinese saying, "The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now." And it seems like PDA really got the idea that you can't make changes, uh, giant changes in the political system, unless the you're laying out a process
Mhm.
of bringing people up in in things like local, state, smaller federal elections, and bringing up the people that you want to vote for higher office.
Yeah.
And it seems like every 4 years or so, we get upset that we are not electing Paul Wellstone. Well,
Yep. Yep.
you have to be able to help Paul Wellstone get a council seat or get a supervisor seat. And
That's
and I
true.
yeah, I
I love that you brought up Paul Wellstone, because I do believe that that was a murder. And I also know that the lack of paper ballots was involved with Norm Coleman and Paul Wellstone's election. It was a really bad situation. And, another Democrat went down in a plane, Carnahan, but his wife was left behind, and she took his Senate seat for the
mhm,
Democrats. With Wellstone, it was like they just wiped them both out, and it was horrible. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible time, and it was really the foundation of it was these all digital elections. I'm glad Sophia asked that question, by the way.
mhm.
I wrote down call Dean today. Anyway, um, and let me tell you a story about Kamala Harris ran for Attorney General in Los Angeles, and it was only 2 years after, I think, the whole Arnold Schwarzenegger thing. Oh, Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to turn California red. He's so popular. Can he be president? Well, he wasn't born here, but maybe they can change the rule. Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to be Ronald Reagan again. So there was this fever in California. I remember a woman telling me, oh, Schwarzenegger is going to do great things for this state. So Kamala runs for Attorney General, and the Republicans freak out. They hate her. It's her first time to run statewide. So if she wins it statewide, she's a threat to national Republicans. So they were really on it to defeat her any way they could. And the count came down to the provisional ballots being counted in LA County, because we're the biggest voting jurisdiction in America, I think in the world. And with, tens of thousands of provisional ballots, and the race was neck and neck. Steve Cooley, the Republican guy, they wanted him bad. So we sent teams down there to, as Sophia was just talking about, to watch the provisional count and how they looked at the signatures. I have to look into why it's changed. But when I met Kamala Harris for the first time, it was on a long ring line, rope line, sticking out your hand. I wanted to meet her. And I stuck out my hand and I said, I'm Mimi Kennedy, Progressive Democrats of America, and we organize people to help. She interrupted me and she went, I know exactly who you are and I know exactly what you did. And this was like a year or two later. And I realized, yup, she was a star. We knew she was a star, but one of the things she can do, regardless of what her policies are going to be and whether we love them all, which we know we're not, she cares about people and she knows what people do and how they work. And so that was 2000, when did she run? 2010 or 2010, I guess. And 14 years later, but the GOP, they think ahead. They saw her, they wanted to quash her. And so, yes, you need to do exactly what you said, Rick. You need to identify who your great people are and don't let them get interfered with. Don't let them get smeared. Don't, everybody can get smeared with something that makes people hate them. Oh, I thought she was so good, but that. And the right wing is perfect at it. They'll pretend they're your friend and then they'll just like, oh, you did this. So yeah, politics is tough and it doesn't get us. But as Americans, we have these paper ballots, this ballot box now. And as Don said, so many people in the world are depending on us to change our policies. We got to keep trying. Thanks.
No, thank you very much. It's funny too. Last week, my wife and I were talking about Midnight in Paris. That's a brilliant movie. Short story. I had to go to a conference in Paris, and it was my first time there. And my wife couldn't make it, and I decided I'm not going to see any of the stuff that we both want to see. So no Arc de Triomphe, no. I could see the Eiffel Tower from the distance because they set up the city that way. And so I just did the stuff I wanted to do that I knew that she would be bored at. So I went to every record store that I could. I went to Roland Garros. I actually played on the clay in Roland Garros and I won. No, but yeah, it was great. So we were talking about that. We've got to go back when we both can go, or she can go without me if she wants.
Speaking of French record stores, do you remember Françoise Hardy?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Do you remember she had a song, Tous les garçons et les filles? Well, that tune has been adopted by Spanish religious radio stations. And there's a wonderful praise song to God that is set to that tune. And I hear it on my longtime friend and house cleaner. She comes more rarely now, but she listens to the station every once in a while. I hear da 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 da, and I've told her in my broken Spanish that was a French pop song. But I love being reminded of that and knowing that culturally it's jumped a fence, and a lot of other people love it too.
And I really appreciate you bringing up people that have been involved with ICUJP. It's amazing to see Blaze's picture there, and the program that we did on Sunday was really about reflecting on who God is here. One of them left, Father Chris Panett, but talk about someone who's been involved
Yes.
in things like
Fox Christie.
yeah, and Pace Bene and a few other things. So I wanted to ask you too. I put up your website on the invite that we sent out. Were there any other groups that or organizations that you wanted to highlight that because I always like to give people homework. I should have been a teacher. Anything that you want people to take
Yeah,
a look at or be involved with?
an action component.
Hmm.
Um, I
Oh, you just
progressive
went on. Oh, there you go.
to the website of Progressive Democrats of America. There's also a Center for Common Ground. Andrea Miller, who was our executive director after Tim Carpenter for a while, she does a postcard thing. Which
Oh, you just went on mute.
people who are writing postcards and to get out the vote, as I say, Brandy has done it and Carol has done it, and it's, I think, an effective way rather than interrupting people's phones and getting 25 texts a day. And it's very important to tell people that when they should check their registration and when they see it, to take a picture of it. Because if there's any purging going on, this is particularly important in swing states. You might not be able to convince the poll worker in front of you on election day that you get to vote, but we are establishing an evidence trail of places where there's vote suppression. And we need that. This is, again, a matter of foresight. Check your
Mhm.
registration and take a screenshot. And if any, I mean, we're all Californians, it's a little different, and we're adept with technology, as your presence here shows. But spread the word to anybody in a swing state who's doing that work. Take a picture, help people check their registration. I think you can check anybody's
Mhm.
registration with their permission, and take a screenshot of it if you have relatives or friends in swing states, especially if people of color. If their registration is there, take a screenshot and send it to them so they have it, because there is purging. Greg Palast's movie Vigilantes is streamable now, and just Vigilantes Inc. INC period. I thought it was a metaphorical title. It's not. The Republican right wingers, the extremists, have formed a group called Vigilantes Inc., and they've incorporated it as a nonprofit. And with their guns, they're going to go to drop boxes and to polling places, and they're going to challenge people at the polls from 15 feet away, going, this person shouldn't vote. So every single person who has their registration with a picture, that's going to be a big help tamping that down. That's what I would say now. And in terms of anti-war, the ceasefire in Gaza, I
Mhm.
don't know who's listening to that. And I don't know why Joe Biden doesn't do something. And I don't know how much, the international situation is tough. Medea Benjamin is right about NATO. They shook the Russian bear, as Tom Hayden put it. Why were we doing that with the arms race? On the other hand, there's a very hostile dictator in Russia. I was going to say this about Saddam Hussein, by the way. I could tell that people in Iraq loved Saddam Hussein the same way people here love Donald Trump. If you kill their guy, it's not going to help. But what do you do when there's a murderous dictator? And usually it's ethnic. It's usually a racial hatred of some sort or a language hatred. And I still maintain that Americans, as the melting pot, have the responsibility to make ethnic boundaries and even language boundaries go down, lower the perceived level of threat between groups, and show people how to do it.
Yeah, that's very true.
And
Um,
the action is Progressive Democrats of America and
yeah,
taking a screenshot of your registration and others.
yeah. So I put in the chat, I put the Center for Common Ground, it's funny you bring that up because my wife, who goes by Mimi, is actually, she got me involved in it. Her handwriting is much better than mine. Mine is like, people be wondering on those postcards why they're getting something from their doctor as a prescription. But we've both been working on that. And it's a great program. And also, too, I put in a link to Greg Pallas' website, and you can find out about screenings for Vigilantes Inc. there. So, a couple things. So, I have to go do something for my folks. My dad's 100, my mom is 95. Um,
Together.
and we don't let dad drive anymore.
Ah.
So they shouldn't let me drive anymore, but that's the thing. So but thank you very much. I've been it's been an amazing presentation. So thank you.
Thank you for helping, Rick. Thank
Mhm.
you.
Thank you, Rick.
Mhm.
Thanks. So I'll go ahead and ask my question. Thank you very much, Mimi. I really admire your work with PDA. When you were working, to build up PDA, I was working in the corporate world, and so, but I can tell you that I've been on the PDA mail. I know I don't go a lot of meetings. I go here and there, but they're always, very enlightening, very interesting. But they call me every single week and send me that link to try to get me to the meeting. So I really admire their determination. So my question is about Tom Hayden, because I worked with one of his former legislative aides, Nathan Winograd, on animal welfare legislation. And Tom Hayden introduced and passed the Hayden Act that protects animals in California shelters. And this was back in 2000, and he worked bipartisan with Republicans to pass this. And so Nathan's always telling me about how Tom Hayden was a master of bipartisanship. He reached across the aisle. He worked with Tom McClintock, who was in the assembly at the time, and they pushed back the big government agencies that didn't want any of these regulations in place, that are still fighting them today. But what do you? I know it's just speculation, but I've always wanted to ask somebody who knew him. What do you think he would think today, if he were here today, about like how the Democratic Party, the establishment, is treating the squad right now? And particularly in this weaponization of anti-Semitism against, like, Rashida Tlaib was censored and Democrats joined in that. And I mean, I know he would be horrified today if he saw what's going on in the California legislature. You have California Democratic lawmakers who are actually picking physical fights with Republicans. And it's just horrific what's going on in California. But at the congressional level, I see too, like even within the party, like somebody like Marianne Williamson is accusing the left in the Democratic Party of being anti-Semitic. I mean, what would you think he would say to this? And given the stakes of what's going on right now with this genocide.
Okay, so Tom has written a lot of books explaining where he's coming from, which is definitely an Irish Catholic working class place. And as an SDS founder, he turned against his parents and everything they held dear. So he's familiar with the hatred of people who are close to you and how that works out, which is usually badly, but sometimes it's necessary to take a stand in opposition, and you can't be worried about how people feel about you. He and Jane, before he advanced in the Democratic Party, he had to promise that he would never cut off aid to Israel. And he was able to do it because he remembers the Holocaust. He remembers anti-Semitism where he grew up, and he is a master. As you know, he helped settle the peace accords in Ireland between the Catholics and the Protestants there. In Ireland, James Joyce said, "We never had a problem with the Jews. You know why? We never let them in." Oh, very funny. Well, that's Ireland. But Tom Hayden knows about all this. And of course, for what's happening in Gaza, he'd be horrified. He would probably be working with the Israelis who don't want Bibi Netanyahu to be prime minister. That's where Tom Hayden would be, because Israel is being as hurt by this war as anybody. And Biden, I don't think, has the vision. Biden versus Hayden would be a perfect example of the rift in the Democratic Party and how they would approach this. What's happening to Rashida Tlaib and to Ilhan Omar and to the squad is that because they belong to the ethnic groups that everybody's afraid of as being anti-Semitic, they're immediately said, well, you're a hate piece. You're a hate piece. And they're just going, no, I have family in Palestine and I'm trying to speak about their suffering. So it's the peoples against the peoples. And one of the reasons Tom's loss is so great is that he was not afraid to stand with Israel when he had to advance in the Democratic Party. And it was a reasonable thing to do because Bibi Netanyahu wasn't doing what Israel's doing now, even though there were people who didn't think he was sufficiently pro-Israel. And then there were people who, thought he was too pro-Israel, but he wanted to change things and he wanted to advance. And he was, I think, once you choose that political life, I think you're right to do that, but you have to know where you stand as you're advancing. And I do think what he would be doing is working with the Israelis. Now, and he was, of course, always for this two-state solution. And people are now saying, but that's a fantasy. I was talking to some people the other night. Okay, so it's going to be Israel/Palestine, which is what Rabbi Michael Lerner, who has recently died, foresaw, that it would be a democracy. Well, okay, but then it can't be an ethnic Jewish state because then you're in a theocracy and you're saying, certain people have more rights here than other people because that's what we really want to be. Just the way here people say America's a Christian nation and a Christian white nation. Well, maybe we'll let some Black people and some Hispanic people in because they're good Christians. And so that'll be our nation. But Jews will be out and Muslims will be out. And we can't have that in America. I mean, everybody is trying to do that, which is why Eastern Europe is such a mess, because there's language stuff there, there's history of peoples and mountainous regions. That's the work now. And James Lawson said, we're all children of God. That's the identity, and start from there. But it's going to be tough. And I do believe that Israel will stay as a state and that Tom would have gone for a two-state solution. And Kamala is saying with the dignity and self-determination of the Palestinians, how that's going to work out, I don't know. But the people of Israel are trying to make it happen by getting rid of the Netanyahu government. And then we'll see what moderation is like in Israel and what's possible. But of course, now we have a whole generation of maimed children saying, you killed my entire family and turned my world into rubble. A parking lot they bragged about. You can't make people love you by doing that. So now there's that. But South Africa and Desmond Tutu taught us a lot about that. I mean, in South Africa, Black people were circling each other with rubber tires and lighting them on fire, necklacing. I remember thinking, that's so horrible, I can't even think about it. And that was in the Black community of South Africa. So then Black and white were horrible and there was complete injustice, as happened in Palestine. The blockade, I want to go back to the blockade. This war is horrible and the occupation was horrible, but how about allowing only in, 900 calories a day per person? That's a concentration camp there. That's what Hitler did. Why was that happening in Gaza? And nobody talked about it to the Israeli government. So, in times of peace, do the work of peace. Question that. Now there's a war and there's two sides and you're either anti or pro. Blaise Bonpane used to say, why is this like a soccer game? I have to choose whose flag I'm waving. I can't do that. This war is wrong. That's Tom Hayden would be working with legislators in Israel. I'm sure.
Okay, I'm not seeing more hands up. So thank you, Mimi. That was really terrific. Really great history. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It was a great turnout. And see you next Friday.